timing. But our last speaker is from Brown University and from WBRU. WBRU's news director, Emily Wooldridge, who is going to set up her laptop, and so I'm going to stall for her for a second.
Yeah, I don't have any visuals, unfortunately. I'm going to just use my voice because, we are a radio news department. But like he said, my name is Emily Wooldridge. I'm a junior at Brown University, and I'm originally from rural Washington State. And WBRU News is independent from Brown, but it's run by Brown students and adults together. And we're covering everything that's happening in Rhode Island and, mostly in Providence because that's where we're based. So it's not exactly a college-focused publication, but we're still, covering college issues that are relevant to the state and covering things that are on other colleges as well. And the topics that are in the description of my talk, I kind of realized as I was trying to formulate a 10-minute talk are way too complicated to talk about in 10 minutes. So I want to focus the short time that we do have together just talking a little bit about some of the structural problems that I see in the media industry, more of just in newsrooms, that are making it difficult for people who have marginalized identities to go into the journalism field. So I want us to think about, our own experiences in media and also thinking about the people who don't have the opportunity to be in this room. And this critique of journalism comes from a place of love. I've been involved in journalism since high school, like probably many of you have been as well. I got to take some people to the New Hampshire primary this year. I've worked at the Brown Daily Herald. And I've definitely seen, through some of these experiences as a young journalist that there are some problems in our industry. I think that there's a lack of diversity in who's covered and also problems with how people are covered. And I feel like a lot of that stems from just the lack of diversity of people sitting in newsrooms themselves. And in the context of this talk, I'm going to define diversity more. I'm going to focus, more on people of color and also people of lower socioeconomic statuses involved in journalism. But there are many other identities as well that I'm not going to cover that can make it difficult for people to be involved in journalism. And also these identities are intersectional as well. And I feel like, as someone who wants to go into this industry, it's my responsibility not only to cover people who are marginalized compassionately and accurately, but I also think that it's important to empower people to tell their own stories. So I'm thinking a lot about how I can help people pursue journalism, especially if they don't have the means to do so and the training and the access to that. And I think that if we pursued that it would just make our newsrooms and our journalism coverage better in general, and we'd be able to cover a wider range of topics and people because, let's be honest, even though we say that we have journalistic integrity and objectivity, our personal experiences, the worlds that we came from before college and, the environments that we are in now, they shape how we see the world. And so that also shapes, who we cover and how we cover it and things like that. And, many of you in this room already have experiences training young journalists in your roles as editors, so how rewarding but also how challenging that pursuit can be. So I think that, it's important for us on an individual level to think about, social movements and issues and identities when we're covering things, but also, a question that I grapple a lot with, especially since I'm going to be graduating next year, is, as a journalist, can I make a bigger impact being a quote unquote woke white person in media? I don't know if that even, if I qualify for that title, trying to make coverage more diverse in an outlet that I'm working at in the future. Or maybe instead I should focus my efforts on trying to train younger journalists, especially people who traditionally don't have access to journalism training. So I just want to, in the short time that we have, just think about how getting jobs in journalism isn't just about work ethic or about luck, that there are a lot of factors that are impacting hiring decisions that are working almost invisibly. And so I just want us to think about these things and then also think about how we can combat them. And so just to start out, we should think about, what do American newsrooms look like today? And the latest American Society of News Editors study found that daily newspapers across America that they surveyed, people of color make up only 12% of those newsrooms. And they said that this number has stayed the same for the past decade. Today, Native Americans make 0.36% of the newsroom population, Latinx and Black people make up about 4% each, and Asian Americans make up 3% of the population. And I also think it's interesting that Middle Eastern journalists are not included in the census, and it makes sense because in the US Census, that's not a category that exists, but especially since we hear so much about the Middle East, about Middle Eastern Americans, Muslim Americans, and Muslims abroad in the news today. And those identities are overlapping, but not the same. And the ASNE in the past 2 years has also started to collect data about biracial people, which I thought was interesting, and they reportedly make up 0.5% of the newsroom population. And I think it's worth noting, which you probably know, that these percentages do not match up with people of color's presence in the US population. So there's definitely a racial gap in newsrooms themselves. And people of color also make up only 12% of the head editors of newsrooms. And another statistic that really stuck with me from the study is how more than a third of daily newsrooms have more part-time and volunteer, which I'm guessing is like a nice way to say unpaid positions than full-time jobs. And this is not only depressing for all of us that are like trying to go into this field, but it just really speaks to how your socioeconomic status can impact your ability to pursue journalism. And if you're coming from a background where you can't afford to work part-time or for free, you may not be able to pursue journalism at all, especially since, as Mr. Brenton said earlier today in his presentation, that these jobs are often located in the most expensive cities in America. So that's also a barrier. And some questions that I think would be interesting to think about in regards to how newsrooms are structured that I can't really find data for. Maybe it would be something people should pursue in grad school. But I'm curious, what region of the country are journalists from? Especially in newsrooms like the New York Times that kind of cover things on a national level, like how many of these journalists grew up in rural areas versus urban ones. I also wonder if there are any regional correlations with who gets journalism jobs. What are the socioeconomic statuses of people going into media? And also how many people are legacies in media? In other words, have family members that are already in journalism. And so I want you all to think about your life before college. Many of you probably got jazzed up to pursue journalism because of the media that you were consuming in your home or that was being consumed in your community. Maybe you listened to Morning Edition on your car ride home or read the New York Times on your couch. And I want us all to be mindful that just accessing media is an immense privilege. And I don't think the internet, unfortunately, has become an equalizer on this front. Because if people aren't consuming media in your home or in your community, you might not even know that reading a newspaper or listening to the Serial podcast is something that people do, or you might not know where to find news, even if that information is free on the internet. And just, speaking from personal experience, I had no exposure to podcasts or radio news before coming to college. I grew up in this really small town in rural Washington state. There were no stoplights, there was no cell phone service. The mountains blocked all the radio airwaves from coming. The only radio station we could get was this classic rock station that my dad always played. And we also had no high-speed internet access. We had dial-up for most of my life, but my house has satellite internet now. And that means videos and podcasts are downloaded really slow. And you can only download so much material before the internet just stops, which happened a lot at my house and led to a lot of fights. So there was no way to download the latest podcast, even if I had known what podcasts were. So I didn't know what NPR was until my freshman year at Brown. And then my sophomore year, I got an internship at the NPR station in Rhode Island, and now I'm running a radio news department. So I guess it worked out, but not having that background, listening to NPR podcasts growing up has definitely made my pursuit of this, career field a lot more challenging. And so on another note, with a show of hands, how many people had journalistic publications at their high school? And I'm guessing that you all worked at those publications because you're here. And so that's another thing that you should think about is, just having access to campus publications is a, great privilege to have as well. And also, how many campus publications now offer work study? Okay, how many people are using work study now? And how many people are, if your campus publication doesn't have work study, are you doing another job on the side? So I mean, that's another thing too that I think we need to think about as college journalists, that, you know, we're trying to have a welcoming newsroom culture and bring in as many people as possible, but we might not be able to have everyone be in our newsroom if they have to, you know, pay the bills for college on their own. And another thing too, you know, how many people in this room have done an unpaid internship at some point or are going to do one this summer? That's another thing that we, you know, I think should think about as well, is that, you know, even though there are some paid internships out there, a lot of people, you have to do the unpaid internships before going into the paid stuff. I know I'm probably, am I out of time? Okay, I'm almost done, I'm sorry. So yeah, so I think some of the things, and I would love to hear, I wish that we could like kind of talk about different ideas to kind of combat some of these things. But some of the ideas that I have are, you know, if your campus publication doesn't have a work-study program, trying to get that in place, or trying to see if the university can help you put something like that in place without, you know, I don't know if sometimes you don't want to take money from the university because it can, you know, maybe alter your content, but, you know, trying to find some kind of way, whether that means, you know, getting alumni funding to do something like that, if you don't already have something like that in place. I think also maybe starting youth media programs, and if in the outside communities where your schools are, and, you know, maybe holding workshops if you can't do a full program for publication for, you know, high schools that don't have campus publications. And I also think just like creating more, because we do have so much access to information right now as college students, is trying to create more scholarship about media. So some of these questions that I raised in the presentation, that we can actually have data to back some of those things up, and just to really have a clearer picture of what newsrooms look like. And I feel like if we have a clearer picture of what they look like, maybe we'll be able to put pressure on media outlets and hold them accountable for making the field more accessible. Yeah, but thank you.